Right, hello again. I'm Ashwin Mehta and I'm here with the eminent and amazing Dr. Taryn Hess. Taryn, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and to continue to talk about something very, very special to both of us, data literacy and, of course, AI literacy and all of the things that go with that.
Absolutely, we've been hard at work for almost a year now writing a paper.
Yes.
Data literacy in the age of generative AI. And for those of you who have read it or are imminently about to read this, there are multiple sections to this paper, weaving in models around culture and change, data and data literacy, and then strategic implementation of artificial intelligence, which has a data dependency. So today we're going to talk about the strategy side of things. How do you implement something that's AI and something that also has a data dependency? So let's have a chat about that. I'll outline the model that's in the paper and we'll have a conversation about that. So the first part of the model is to have a purpose. And in one of the previous sessions, Taryn, we mentioned that when we're thinking about culture and change, having a purpose is one of the key things, because if you implement something with no purpose, you can pretty much expect no benefits. That's a very strong statement. Maybe I'll crawl back on that a little bit, but it's difficult to measure these things. So in the strategy space, I typically look at, as an AI strategist, I tend to look at having some kind of business problem that we can address with some kind of implementation of technology. Let's call that artificial intelligence enabled technology. And I tend to look at that as here's where you currently are, and here's where maybe we need some transformation. And you might have some implementation of some things along the way, but ultimately you want to have a business problem that's measurable, and you can have some success criteria afterwards to say the thing we did mattered. We have some measurable impact. We have something that's changed through the course of the implementation that we've done. And that's really that strategy piece, purpose, and then some kind of treatment that gives you some kind of expectation of change. How is that, if it is at all, different to your model of culture and change in this space?
Well, I'm gonna double down on your statement first. Know where you're going. You're not going anywhere, right? So that's
Yeah.
where all of this comes into place. You have to have a vision or North Star, whatever you want to call it, a purpose, a strategy. Otherwise, what are you trying to accomplish? And then you tie all of that to, of course, us data people, right? We want some metrics tied to that so that you can see performance and make sure you're, progressing along the way. And then when you throw culture into it, which is that we talked about it being that squishy, hard to measure thing, you have to break that down, of course, into things that you can make tangible, which really, and we didn't even talk about this last time, it also boils down to what you prioritize. Ultimately, when you think about culture, and especially when you're thinking about data, AI, anything digital, it's all about what you're saying is important. So if you say, okay, I'm going to go buy a whole bunch of tooling and then here, go at it, right? You're saying, okay, my tools are important to me. But if you don't then take the time to get your people ready and get your culture ready and to get the things in place, are they going to use it? Probably
Yeah.
not, which gets back to your strategy, right? In your vision. It's like we want to have everything integrated and together. Otherwise, again, doubling down, you're not going to go anywhere. You have to
Yeah.
have, that North Star to guide you, or whatever you want to call it, right? You can call it a strategy, a vision, a roadmap.
Yeah.
But without that, it's not going to happen.
Absolutely. And I think we're both in the sort of learning or human capital space, but it's something that in the past I've seen with tech implementations. We're going to implement a particular bit of tech across an organization, and we're going to say, right, we've done the tech bit. Everybody's got access. We maybe do a little bit of, here's a user guide, right? Off we go. And then a year later, we all complained that actually nobody's using this shiny bit of tech that we went to the market and we implemented. It's like, well, nobody knows it's there. And if they do know it's there, maybe the user interface isn't great, or maybe it's not useful to the end user, but it's vitally useful to leadership or the tech team or whatever it is. So yeah, we need to be considering people throughout. And this is part of this change management thing, right? Make sure we get adoption. So strategy, we've got a purpose, right? If we've got a purpose, we know where we're going. Once we know where we're going, then the next part of the model that's in the paper is to think about the operating model. So what do we need to make this a success? If we want to go down a particular course of action, we want to take a journey down a particular road, we want to navigate the choppy seas of learning technology towards a utopia that is better learning outcomes for our workforce, then how do we actually do that? And probably we need a combination of things that makes up an operating model. And now typically I would think about the operating model to be people, processes, maybe premises if we're still in a world where we're entering an office. If we have manufacturing facilities, if we have specialized facilities, we can think about those. So people, process, premises, then we have technology and data, we have supply chain, of course, we need to think about suppliers, and then we have things like money, finance, budgets, how much is this going to cost? So accompanying a strategy, we would need to think about all of these things. But I guess the question that I typically get asked is, why would we think about these things before we just go and do a tech implementation? And part of that is that we need to think about governance, we need to think about oversight, and in the AI space particularly, we need to think about, do we have the right roles? Do we have people who are responsible and accountable for things like ethics, things like governance, things like cybersecurity, data privacy, and all of these things? What about leadership? Who's steering the ship as we go down a particular course? So I would say that next bit has a little bit of governance in it, but it's primarily an operating model piece. And that then allows us to do something else, to go down this particular road or particular course of action. How is that the same or different to culture change and people change?
Exactly the same. And then my add-ons to that. So like literally the same. The add-ons though is not just do we have the right roles in place, what are the skills that we need? Again, back to that vision and that purpose that we need for these different roles within our operating model, looking at the gaps that we may or may not have. Where do we need to shuffle people around? Where do we need to upskill? And, then it gets to some of the harder questions around, who do we keep? Who do we shift, right? Like, do we shift them into a different career pathway? Do we then look at building out something else? And then also, like, you have to have the right mindset with it. So it's not just looking at, these are the skills I need on paper. Who is ready and willing to, yes, champion, so that's a piece of it, but to join us on our journey. So you have to have all of that baked into the roles of your operating model. And then, of course, all of that tied into the processes piece as well. All of that is critical when it comes to changing culture, when it comes to transformation. You have to have all of these pieces of infrastructure in place to make it real. It's not enough to just say, okay, we want to do this. We're all going to sing Kumbaya together, right? You've got to get the infrastructure in place as well. Are you like, we get excited about this, but then, a month, like you said, after like a year out, months out, after we've had this really cool, shiny tool, this new greatest latest thing, well, it's probably not going to work if you didn't do your homework to get all of that in place, right? Which gets back to that building of that, the base of our mountain, which we were talking about before as well. Like, that's a part of that base. You have to have infrastructure in place to make this sustainable for the long term, for the long haul.
That's a very interesting point. And the point that you made also about OD, organizational development and design, and how do we, when we're thinking about an operating model, it's not only the operating model for learning, it's the operating model for the entire organization potentially, because I was having a discussion with somebody, and I forget who it was, right? But I was having a chat, and it was around the idea of AI coaching. So you have these coaching and mentoring platforms out in the market, and we say, well, fine, we're going to implement this particular piece, and it's going to give us a scalable coaching functionality, because everybody will get some kind of question and answer or some kind of virtual agent support. And in the operating model and governance side of things, you would want to be thinking about risk, and you'd want to be thinking about ethics and things like that. Now, with a coaching proposition, of course, you have the obvious question that comes back, that if I implement an AI coaching tool, does that mean I can now redeploy or potentially get rid of all of my coaches? It's an ethics question, right? But it's also an OD question.
Yeah. Yeah, as soon as you said that, I had a little physical reaction to it. I mean, yeah, my initial thoughts are, sure, AI help us drive some efficiencies. It's going to also provide the really, really valuable immediate feedback that is really truly drives a lot of change and drives a lot of long term, and we're talking about schema development, like just breaking it down, like how we operate as humans. So it's going to help us learn from that learning standpoint. Where the cringing part comes from is, are we there yet with AI? Are we really to a point to where we can say it's robust enough to completely replace us as human coaches and mentors? I would say no right now, right? I think AI is an amazing tool that we can use as an asset to help support, drive efficiencies, and drive that immediate feedback piece. I think it doesn't replace that human interaction piece. Like there's going to be nuance to this. The AI is not going to be able to be as creative and innovative as we are as humans. So when it comes down to rethinking an approach or trying to come at it from a different angle, you're still going to need that human interaction there. Sure, the AI is going to help support you, but I think it's a trifecta now, which I'm making a four-way triangle as I'm saying that. I think you still have to have that human mentor coach as a part of that conversation to continue to drive it in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of parts to that, right? So the first part is that, is the technology there? Yeah, probably not yet, right?
Yeah.
The second part is, though, when we think about sort of the educational literature and think about a little bit old school, but we think about, I think it was 2003, maybe, I read a paper that was published around that time, and it was getting the mix right. I think it was something like that, right? Which was Anderson, I want to say. Communities of practice guy. Now, in that, it was there are learning interactions. So to have a high quality or meaningful learning experience, we want to have interactions between the learner and the teacher. We want to have interactions between the learner and the content, and we want to have interactions between learner and learner, so peer, social learning, and that kind of thing. And when we're talking about AI coaching, we're talking about that learner-teacher kind of interaction. And potentially we're going beyond that to the learner manager and learner mentor kind of, the Vygotskian, more knowledgeable other kind of area. And when we start to think about that, it's debatable whether or not the technology will ever really get us there, because what we need is a kind of relationship between teacher and student, between mentor and mentee, between master and apprentice, or whatever it happens to be. We need that relationship to be able to provide that stretch goals and making sure that people can go and fulfill their potential. And that's ever so slightly different from having an information delivery bot, which allows you to scrape the internet and, find out all of the things at the click of a button in the palm of your hand that you probably couldn't find out very easily in the old days. So I think there's a mix of that, the educational paradigm. And there's also a little bit around what actually is AI in the marketplace. I don't mean what is AI as a functional technology, but in the marketplace, you have this mix of AI as a functional technology. I can buy a SaaS product and it has AI in it. And you have AI as a marketing tool. So I've got a product, it's got AI in it. Please buy my product because it's got AI in it, even though maybe it doesn't. And then the third aspect of this is the kind of, I want to do organizational development and potentially outsource or restructure or whatever the terminology we're using these days is for reducing headcount. And I want a reason for doing that. If I'm a CEO of a business, and you see this all the time, we've seen this throughout 24, we've seen this across many businesses, that for some reason we need to reduce headcount. And sometimes AI can be the excuse, even if it's not the reality. And that kind of puts into question this idea of, is the tech ready? Does the tech need to be ready for businesses to make a structural change? Whether it's right or wrong, I'm not commenting on that, but it's a reality that happens, right? So it's complex, no?
Very complex. And as you're talking through that, I immediately started thinking about the self-determination theory and how there's this interplay of needing connectedness and autonomy at the same time for things, right? So it's same premise that you have to have a combination of both. So being able to be connected to your community, to people, to peers, to colleagues, to help you actualize what do these things mean for me and how do I move them forward so that you are then comfortable with using them and adopting them. But at the same time, the autonomy part comes in, which I think ties in as of right now, right? There's so much more to learn about AI with AI. So that's going to help drive at least currently a lot of that autonomy, using that as a tool to get information, to make sense out of things in a safe place that maybe you don't have to interact with that peer right away. So then when you come back to being connected, you have this combination of the two things that help support each other. We're in a very interesting time. I'll just keep adding to that, right? We're still learning the best ways to leverage this, as you're highlighting, right? And also agree, it's being used, AI in particular, is being looked at as a way to be more efficient. Maybe it's ready, maybe it's not. I think it's all in how we continue to look at it as a tool. And if we look at least current state, the combination of what we're talking through, yes, we need to use it, but can't be left alone just yet. We'll see how it continues to evolve. So maybe in a year from now, maybe we keep doing this podcast and coming back to this thought and seeing where we're at, current state versus past state, which is current state. Yeah. I'm curious to see how it all evolves.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, let's talk about the next part of the model, which is like tech and data, right? So if you're implementing AI, of course, you need some AI to implement. It seems kind of obvious, right?
Makes sense.
But yeah. So with what you were just saying, though, this idea of like AI is kind of everywhere, and it has been for a long time. And in the typical sort of HR or L&D paradigm, you would say you have content, you have systems, and learners interact with content on a system, and that interaction itself produces some data. So we have these kinds of parameters to play with. And it's kind of a web paradigm, because we would say, well, we're going to produce some files, and those files are going to be in some kind of digital format. And we're going to have a SaaS system, but it's effectively providing access to media files. Within that, we might have some kind of fairly explainable AI functionalities. Things like recommender systems, things like search systems, for example. And that's basically been the paradigm of platforms, learning platforms, for quite a long time. And we get some kind of functionality in HR systems as well. Particularly around the skills area, for example, matching people to jobs and matching skills to roles and things like that. In the Gen AI space, generative AI, which is the paradigm of the last couple of years, being able to make content, text, videos, audio, etc. Everything's ever so slightly different, because now we have something it's provoking the thought around what we were just talking about, which is the displacement of knowledge workers this time. So it's not affecting the manufacturing side of things much yet, but it takes us down this journey of, well, how evolved is the tech really? How can we use the tech really? And how much, to your point, how much is this going to change over? And if you think back over the last couple of years, we saw disruption in 22, we saw some incremental disruption in 23, but it was about adoption scale rather than the tech moving, very, very quickly. And now what we're seeing is it's not plateauing as such, but we're getting some stability in the market around convergence and divergence. So can you see that trend continuing, or do you think it's going to stabilize a little bit and we do the Gartner trough of disillusionment and we start to do some work? Where do you think we are in that space?
I mean, we'll see. We'll break out our mirror ball right now and try to see if we can predict this. I do actually think we're going to hit a trough and it's going to come back up. Just based on conversations that I think both of us are having all the time right now, is there's still fear and anxiety around this. And also people trying to figure out what is the best way to take advantage of AI, particularly Gen AI. When I think about the learning space, as you were highlighting, there's this big push right now to leverage Gen AI to help create content. It just seems to be a natural fit. It seems to make sense. Let's cut down a bunch of time. Because truly, like when you look at the traditional way prior to having all of these Gen AI tools, content development was extremely taxing. It takes a lot of time to write. It takes a lot of time with your subject matter experts to get the knowledge out of their brains into the paper. Then you go through this long process. We all know Addy and pulling, going through that process, or waterfall, or whatever you follow at this point. Gen AI does have some potential with that. So again, there's some fear, there's some anxiety, there's some people trying things out, trying to figure out what makes the most sense. And then when you take that out of just the content development space and you look at what does this mean for educators in general, how do I best take advantage of this? So if I am a teacher and I already don't have enough time in my day, I'm
Yeah.
excited about Gen AI because it could save me time, and I need time back because I already work more than I get paid for. So I've lived that, right? Like we know how that works. So
Mm.
how do I take advantage of it? Well, I don't know how much time it's going to save you. Sure, it can save you some time around maybe lesson planning and things like that. But then how do I, on the flip side of that, get my learners to take advantage of it? How do I give them the experience, the exposure? Because they're going to need it too. So it's not just a tool for me as an educator or as someone in L&D. You have to think about, I need to also prepare my learners, my participants that are going through my workshops, whatever level you're in, if it's corporate, if it's manufacturing floor, if it's secondary teacher, university level teacher. How do I prepare my students to then also think about this from two lenses? It's from leveraging Gen AI and also thinking about it from that context perspective. Back to your original question, I think we are gonna go through a little bit of a trough. It may not be extreme, but I think it's gonna continue to happen as we're working through some of these fears that people have, working through what is the best way to take advantage of this. And obviously there's a ton of people experimenting in this space and taking advantage of it right now. They're learning as they go. There's some
Yeah.
failures and some changes that need to have, lessons learned that they're having to pivot and adjust as they go. And then once a lot of those early adopters get through that, they can share that out with people and then get more people on board. So I do see a dip and then it coming back up. I think it has so much potential for it not to.
Yeah. I think so. It does have potential. What I've seen up to this point, what I've seen in throughout 24 really, and I don't know if this will change in 25, is that the primary driver for doing this is cost. So we're saying our learning programs used to cost this big, and now we want them to cost this much. Or our time to reach our learners with something that was finished was this long, and now we want it to be this long. And what I'm not seeing a conversation around is the other way around, to say, well, it used to take this long. It used to take, let's say, 6 weeks, and whatever, something nebulous used to take 6 weeks. And now we can do it in 2. But how about we use the tools, technologies, and skills that allow us to do it in 2? We still take 6, but we make it the richest, most wild and meaningful experience that these folks have ever seen. So that's using the same time and resource, slightly different tool set, to change the outcome and change the experience. And I don't think I've had that discussion with anybody. So part of my mind, the way my mind works is I'm thinking that it's just going to keep being a cost consideration. But I'd like to start to see some of these mind-blowing experiences that we probably could create with some of the tools that are out there. What do you think?
I'm smiling because I have actually had this conversation only once. I'll be honest, just once. So it's new, right? Like this whole thought is new, I think, within our space. I've had this conversation once with somebody, and I would love for it to still take that 6 weeks and us to take advantage of all that time saving to make these amazing, mind-blowing experiences. I don't think that's going to be the reality, though. What I think is going to happen is we're going to say, okay, that 6 weeks, we cut it down to 2 for content development. Okay, we've got the content in place. Maybe we take 2 of those weeks back, so we still have a cost savings of 2 weeks to do some more work here. Maybe it's really making sure we have our needs analysis done, because let's be honest, what often happens in L&D is we're told, okay, I need training on this thing, go make it happen. And it takes that 6 weeks regardless. So maybe instead of it taking 6, we get more time up front to do a true deep analysis and figure out, is this really what needs to happen? And align the skills and maybe take advantage of things that are already out there. Take that other 2 weeks to build out the content. So you still have a savings, and what all is going to happen in that space. Maybe it's creating more practical activities that really are engaging from a role-based standpoint to drive people to practice doing these things, whatever it might be, in a safe space. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's more analysis. Maybe it is building out some really, really cool, amazing interactive tools. I'm not sure, right? Like that's the part that we got to figure out is what to do with that extra time. I think that my prediction, I don't think it's going to stay at that 6 weeks. I think that cost savings piece, which I completely agree is driving this, is going to have to be justified. Somebody is going to ask for it. Give me that ROI, which is a really hard thing for people without me explain that value in numbers. And someone's going to say, okay, I get it. Like you're saving me in costs. You want to make adoption and engagement really, really high on this. I'll give you a little bit of time back, but I'm not going to give you it all back. That's where I'm at right now with it.
Yeah, and to do like campaigning and comms and things like that around. Yeah.
Agreed. Yep.
But the focus of our paper was data literacy, so let's bring this back to data literacy, right? So one of the things that I would love to see, and I've been kind of looking for this for a good few years now, is many years ago, back at the dawn of time, in the midst of time, we had the promise of a new data specification. We had the promise of XAPI and the ability to think about activity-based or granular data. Now with generative AI and conversational interactions with large language models, small language models, etc., we have the potential to do conversational analysis and be thinking about how do we start to measure knowledge in the flow of work? How do we start to measure application? How do we start to measure things like sentiment? So we have the potential to really change what we look at in terms of data. That's learner data. The metrics that we should be looking at are probably still operational metrics, so things that have an impact on share price and revenue and all of these things. But we haven't seen mass sort of adoption of XAPI as a standard. I don't think I've seen a data standard for transcript scraping or transcript analysis, although there are plenty in academia. I don't think I've seen any industrially. So the next phase of data in organizations, when we think of the understanding of data concepts all the way through to the application of data tools that give you insight, we know that the fuel for the AI engine is data, and it's going to, there's going to be a dependency on organizations to get their data right. But data is one of these success factors that you need to get right for AI implementation for those reasons. Can you see a future state where maybe we're in L&D, we're getting better at our data?
I think we have to. It's not, to me, a matter of, it's not like a wish list item anymore. I think that's past. I think we have to. It's now. We have to better understand what is the data that we need to collect. How do we analyze it? How do we critically think with it? How do we use it then to support our value proposition? That right there. Yes, everyone needs to grow their skills. I think that is fundamentally understood by everyone. However, then the investment to make that happen and the investment into making engaging, impactful types of training, types of learning experiences, how do we justify that? We justify that with data. We have to understand data better. There's just no way around it. And obviously, you and I love data. Like, this is our thing. Yeah. It's one of our areas of passion. So coming from me, like, it's easy to say that. But, like, truly working through however many years I have of experience at this point, I have never seen more of a need to have an understanding of data within the learning and development space because of this need to be able to justify what it is that we do when we've got this Gen AI push that could supposedly create this content for us. Well, why am I, if I am on a board somewhere, not just saying, okay, well, let me have one instructional designer who can do prompt engineering all day and create a whole bunch of content that can be pushed out to my people. I can save a whole team, and that just makes sense. Yeah. Well, as an L&D person, we know that Gen AI piece is just a tool. It's a tool in our toolkit, that it's not going to create the most engaging, interactive things, because while it can have a conversation with us, it cannot empathize with what we go through as learners. It cannot empathize with what it means to go through change and what it means for me to understand how are these things, whatever it is, right? How is this going to benefit me? It's not going to tell me my why, because it's not going to understand that, right? So as an L&D professional, data is going to be my backbone to helping drive that conversation and to get me to be able to, this might be extreme, but justify why it's important for us to be here. So I don't think it's optional anymore. I think it is critical. We all need to understand data better, the degree to which we can talk about, right? We don't all need to be data scientists. That is not what I am proposing by any means. We just need to have a fundamental understanding what we're talking about, literacy around data and how to use it to make decisions and to help teach others our value within the space of an enterprise and helping them accomplish the goals that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the literacy point is, how do we get insight that helps us to justify and adapt our learning and teaching strategies such that we get a better outcome for the organization? That's a slightly different thing for, human growth and self-actualization, which is a different reason for learning, but that's personal learning rather than corporate learning. Mm-hmm. But the other challenge, this is an age-old challenge, I think, but the thing that we had before, we now have a way to do basically that for much less investment. And what I mean by that is that what you were just saying about having a virtual agent, whether it's ChatGPT or Copilot or something else, you have a virtual agent, you ask it a question, you get some text response. That's not actually too much different in fact, it's kind of better than the norm from 2 years ago, which was companies would have lots of basically RISE courses, which are text on a screen, accessible via a web browser. And if you have lots of those, you don't actually have the ability to search within your LMS for those things. So now we have the ability to search within lots of PDFs. Take that to the next stage. We have a conversational agent, which can to some degree do that search for you. So when we're looking at a gap, we're looking at the comparison between lots and lots of sort of image and text e-learning courses and a conversational agent. And I'm being sort of deliberately provocative in saying that. But if that's what we're looking at, then that seems a fairly obvious business case to just say, let's do away with these things. Now, if it was high quality experiences, that would be a very different conversation. But if we take that bottom end of the market and just say we have lots of text and image courses, and now we have a chat agent, it seems like a fairly obvious decision which way to go. What do you think?
From a fundamental task-to-task basis, and taking the quality piece out, taking out, I want to have an engaging experience that is going to drive interest. It's going to drive pushing people and stretching people to a different space. If we're taking that part out, just apples to apples, we're looking at content. How do we get the content? How do we source it? Sure. I agree. Like task to task. Task to task.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is one of the advantages of all of these Gen AI tools, is to help with pulling together that content. Now, whether or not that content, again, we mentioned this already, is it ready? How accurate is it? If it's pulling from sources we know that are accurate, okay, that's fine. But are those sources up to date? If we're talking about just RISE courses in an LMS, what if there's cutting edge things that we didn't put into those RISE courses before?
Yeah.
So how do we then pull in that content and make sure that it's accurate? So there's lots of little questions like that for me, which then lead me to the piece of that value of having that human there and the human interaction. I think it has to be a combination of the two things, right? We have to have human and we have to have AI. We can't just let it not run off, that's a horrible way to describe it, but just leverage Gen AI to build all of our content, because there's so many little nuances to that piece. Sure, static things that aren't changing fundamentally make sense, task to task. Things that are changing, things that we're trying to be provocative about, I'll use your same word when it comes to a learning perspective and stretch people. Yeah. I don't see that as being a one-to-one.
Yeah, and it's part of the reason I touch on that is it's kind of the foundation level of data literacy for L&D, where we say, well, we have digital artifacts, whatever they may be. We have formats, maybe legacy formats. We have things that we have a package or a file structure that contains some data about some things. So it's got some information. It might have sort of metadata and things like that in it. And then what you would typically do in an academic environment, scientific environment, you would say, well, I'm going to do an intervention and I'm going to do some kind of comparison, whether it's control group, you're looking at A/B testing, you look at pre-post testing, and you would say, I can, to some degree of confidence, say that there has been a change, and that change is not just due to chance. So I have an intervention, and that intervention produced value for the business. Now, in the age of generative AI, we have the ability or the opportunity to scale that kind of thing, to say, well, we have lots of interventions. Those interventions are conversational. We can, to some degree, tell from the data whether or not there has been a change, whether the intervention was efficacious or not. Being able to do everything I've just said requires a leap, a jump, maybe just a step in terms of data literacy for L&D teams. Do you think that's achievable?
Absolutely. So we both of us have an academic background along with all of our experience within the industry as well. So I absolutely agree. And this is where I think we need to get that. It could be, again, step, leap, bridge that we're building, however far it needs to be or will be for different people. It has to happen. We have to be better at understanding data, and to not just fundamentally data, right? But then the processes of what you were describing around piloting content, getting data to be able to explain that this program, this thing, this asset, whatever it is, made an impact. How it made an impact, will depend, if you're trying to measure business goals or if you're trying to measure something else, whatever it might be. But to be able to pull all of that together, you have to have data skills. You have to have analysis skills. You have to have critical thinking skills, which is data literacy, all of the things that we're talking about. So it's a non-issue for me. It has to happen. We have to be better at this. Gen AI is not going away. We need to take advantage of it. We have to think about what is the best way to do that. And then to do that, we have to have data literacy skills. We just have to.
Absolutely. So that's why it's part of the model, right? The models that we've written a paper about. So let's just run through that model. So we've got strategy, we've got operating model, we have technology and data and the interplay between those two things. And the final bit of the model in our paper is the concept of the environment. So whether that's the social environment, the technological environment, what's happening in the marketplace, the political environment, we have in the EU, we have the AI Act that's enacted, that's coming into force. I think various other countries. Do you have this in the States? You have a regulatory environment in the States, right? Around this?
I'm gonna be careful with my words at the moment. EU tends to be around a lot of things a little more ahead of us in the States on these types of things for whatever reason. And I do think there's going to be a push, I'm sure, more around this. So like even where I'm at, we have at EPAM, we are pushing out, well, although I would argue that we're in the cutting edge of a lot of things AI in general, but we're pushing out for everyone in our enterprise e-learnings and trainings and things like that around AI. Do I think it's coming for everybody? Yes, because this is something we cannot ignore. I think for the States, it's a bit more optional at the moment. So depending on what that strategy and that vision is and your purpose, which we keep hitting home on for your organization, you'll see this coming in different waves for the different organizations. Clients and organizations that I've been talking to in the EU are ahead of the game on this. So we have been helping around training. You mentioned the act that has come through. Right now, I would say a lot of AI training, Gen AI in particular, but AI generally is really starting to kickstart in the EU. And then obviously there's pockets in the US that are pushing it.
And it's not only about the regulatory environment, also the policy environment. I think a lot of the big tech houses, the Microsofts and the Googles of this world also have responsible AI principles and things like that. But they're making sure that they're leading the charge in this space. And there is also the societal impact, how people are feeling and what the discourse and the media and things like that are. and how that poses risks. So the usual kind of spectrum of risks that we would see, reputational, legal risks and things like that. Copyright is, of course, part of that as well. But all of this, what I'm saying, effectively, you could do a pest analysis on this, but effectively it's the external environment that goes hand in hand with things like culture and skills and some of the other aspects that we've touched on in the change management piece. So just running end-to-end through that model, these are the factors that one should consider if we're looking at AI implementation, and that's what we've outlined in the paper as part of our data literacy drive, right?
Yes.
So we've gone through that model. We've had a robust discussion around it. I would like to obviously say it's been a pleasure working with you on this paper, but thank you so much for this particular time, and I'm sure we'll do it again. We'll keep the conversation going.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
See you soon.
Bye.